Hello and welcome to Politics Today. In this programme today we'll be asking, is the West committing suicide with mass immigration? And to discuss this very sensitive and timely topic, I'm joined by Melanie Symonds, editor of Heart newspaper. Welcome to the programme, Melanie.
Yeah.
And also Egyptian academic and author Tarek Heggy, who's vast experience in the subject. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
I'll start off with you, Tarek, because you have an interesting background. You were born and raised in Egypt, and you are a leading light in terms of Egyptian academia on your calls for freedom in the region, not only in Egypt but also in the Middle East as well. And you've written this very interesting article that we're basing the programme and is the West committing mass suicide with a huge number of Islamic immigration into Britain, into Europe and also into the Western world. Can you share with us from your experience growing up in the Middle East some of the dangers of this mass uncontrolled Islamist immigration into Britain and Europe?
I think you refer to the key word, uncontrolled. I have nothing against immigration to Europe or to my country. I actually love my country when it had minorities, when Alexandria had Jewish community, Maltese, Cypriots, Greek. It does enrich life. I believe that also this applies in Europe. Europe needs to have multicultural population, but this is something, and uncontrolled is a different word. When you have the enemies of your culture is a product or a byproduct of long march of struggling. Say from Voltaire until today, you have a value mechanism. This value mechanism should be respected by the newcomers. Why are you coming here? Because here is a better place. So abide by this. This is not what happens. The uncontrolled immigration is very dangerous. It brings about the enemies of the Greco-Roman civilization. Sometimes you call it Judeo-Christian civilization. Why you, with your open eyes, allow the enemies of this civilization, which is the peak of human civilization? The peak of human civilization today is a European civilization. And what is in America is a branch of that. What is in Australia is another branch. Why you allow people to come to throw fire on this? So the word, I think you answered it in your question by saying uncontrolled. The whole problem is related to control. You should be selective. You should select immigrants who are coming here to be added value, not to be hidden explosives.
Absolutely. And Melanie, the issue of immigration is a very topical one. For almost a decade, it was a taboo subject, particularly in journalism, media, and also in politics. But it seems very clear that when the British people voted to leave the European Union, one of the major factors was the mass immigration and the lack of integration on behalf of those immigrant communities into the UK. Do you think now the government is taking this a lot more seriously than it did before?
Yes, I think they are. What's currently concerning me is what rules they're applying about the influx of EU citizens after Brexit. They're talking about relaxing the rules on keeping it much the same for EU citizens. I have no problem with that, and let's have all the students coming in. But I'd like equal rights given to people from other countries. And I completely agree with Tarek saying about these other nationalities bringing value. Everyone bringing value. You know, we need professional people. It's wonderful if they can come and make us multicultural. I do wonder what we mean, though, by having a multicultural Europe, and if we do need it, I don't know. I know that the Hungarian Prime Minister stuck his head above the parapet and spoke about this and attracted a lot of criticism.
And Tarek, what do you think we've seen this acceptance of uncontrolled mass immigration into the Western world over the last few decades without really studying the impact that it has? It's okay if an immigrant comes over to this country who wants to improve their lives, they want to earn better money, they want to live in a democracy and have freedom that they're granted here, but then to use our own freedom, to use our own democracy and institutions of democracy against us, and not to integrate with mainstream society, but to create a kind of a polarizing opposite society within our own society that is odds with our values. How and why do you think so many Western leaders allowed this to take place, which could be considered Europe committing suicide?
A question that I lived with like 10 years. Because it bothered me. Why? I look at Europe as the peak of civilization, scientific advancement, philosophically, culturally, on top of the world. And then a big mistake is made as such. So I lived with the question, how can very advanced people make such a mistake? I have been thinking of this, honestly, for 10 years. You described me as bold, I'll be even blunt.
We like that.
The outcome of my research is based on the results of elections in European and Western European countries. I had to get the results of the parliamentary elections in all Western European countries over 30 years. I had to come to the conclusion that the unplanned non-selective immigrants vote to the left. And the left returns the favor by accepting them and their family members and their culture and their chaos. For instance, before you occupy a street to pray on Friday, you have to have a permit. They don't have a permit. And they do many things like this. The left feels indebted to them. You vote for the left has to do something for you. What is this something? To turn blind eye and leave you to talk about applying Sharia in Birmingham, allowing 4 wives in Bradford, things of the sort. In return of, so it is the most dangerous Machiavellian game ever. At the end, and I have a message to the left, you are supporting your prime enemy. For them, you are an enemy. Your leftist ideas are enemy.
Yes.
And when they can cut your throat, they will.
Very chilling. And Melanie, I think Peter Mandelson, the architect of New Labour, admitted to very much of what Tarek was saying only a couple of years ago when Tony Blair was our Prime Minister, effectively saying that he wanted mass uncontrolled immigration into the country, primarily because it would result in greater votes for the Labour Party. Are we now seeing the consequences of that, as we've seen, for example, the Labour Party shift towards a kind of more Islamist position and incorporating more of the Muslim concerns when it comes down to the electorate, because they know that in many of these old Labour heartlands and constituency, they now have very, very big Muslim populations?
Well, I think there's an inherent contradiction, as Tarek was saying, in the Labour position, the leftist position, and the position of Islamists and Muslims from other countries who have not, as Tarek said, they haven't grown up with our Judeo-Christian values. But the point that I want to make is that when I look back at our education system, from the 60s onwards, it was the left which dominated the educational establishment. And so they had all this package. There was a huge pushback against colonialism. say my parents would have grown up with the idea that the empire was good. From the 60s onwards, there was the idea that the empire was bad. And therefore, I think with it came a lot of colonial guilt. And therefore, they had to kind of bend over backwards to say, oh no, you're all okay, we'll be multicultural. I mean, when I did my teacher training in, the end of the 80s, and I've already had done other work before that, but there were whole lectures given over not to teaching us how to teach, but about the evils of our empire. Well, they don't put it quite like that, but the benefits of multiculturalism and trying to reform our own brains in the process, trying to make us accept, to feel guilty about previous generations' restrictions. And there was this sort of subtle blurring of identity of who we were as a nation. And perhaps that has happened across Europe, and particularly, say, under communism in Eastern Europe. And therefore, they were all made to feel, well, you know, we got it wrong.
And Tarek, one of the great bastions of our democracy is religious freedom. The fact that you can come to Britain or Europe or the United States or Canada, Australia, and you can choose to follow any religion that you want is part of what makes, for example, our Western civilization so strong. But are you particularly concerned when, for example, our Western leaders, whether it's in Britain or particularly with the European Union, want to try and create a new identity? They want to break down our Judeo-Christian heritage and replace it with an incorporating multiculturalism, and to say that all religions are equal, all cultures are equal, and so therefore the enemy is the old refraining Judeo-Christian heritage?
I think we need to spend a lot of time on some terms. One of them is political guilt, political correctness, and when we analyze, we will find big mistakes. Let us start from the following. I believe that we have one civilization and many cultures. Islamic civilization died. The Greek civilization died. The Roman civilization died. The Persian civilization died. We have one civilization. And what is in Japan is to large extent Western, but with a Japanese culture.
Yes.
But they are following the Western civilization in their production, in their work system. There is no Asian management. There is good management and bad management. So if we start from there, that we have a civilization and many cultures, we will reach the right destination. We want different people from different cultural backgrounds without cracking the civilization, without being an enemy of the civilization. And this is happening, that some people are enemies of civilization. What does it mean that a very radical Islamist says in a Norwegian TV interview I participated in? Europe will be all Muslims, and even the Queen of England will be veiled. Somebody will say, this is a joke. No, it's not a joke. It's very serious. He has one model in his mind for what's correct and what's wrong. And this is the problem of Islamism, of being like communism exactly. The whole world will be communist. The whole world will be Islamist. Yeah? There is only one model for what is right and what's wrong. So I think that we have major mistakes made in the Western countries, including this sense of guilt referred to. Why? Because as somebody who considers himself in a way a historian, the British Empire can be only a shame when you measure what it did in the 19th century by the measures of the 21st century, which is a mistake academically. Academically, if somebody is my student, I tell him, no, stop here. Don't say the Romans were throwing their enemies to the large cats to eat. Everybody was doing this at the time. So always measure by the measurement of the time. So this guilt is unjustified. Because I had the chance to say to many people questions that the Arabs are not used to hear. Like, did you ever think of what you would have done if you had the military arsenal of Israel in your hands? Questions like that. People have to ask these questions. Yeah. Were you busy thinking why you were occupied? You didn't occupy? You have to think of this. And when you think of this, you will come to using the measure of the time. The British Empire was not a shame at the time. It might be a shame if it happens today. It might. But it was not a shame. And if the Arabs or the victims had the chance of occupying Europe, they wouldn't have hesitated. So we have to, we have to be, this word being blunt or bold, we have to be. Otherwise we cheat each other. Yeah? When the Arabs stopped at the northern borders of Spain, did they stop because they had a mercy or because they failed to do more? They invaded Spain. If they had a chance to reach Vienna, they would have done it. And actually they did beat siege Vienna. Yeah. So we have to be blunt. This political correctness will kill part of the West because it makes you choose what is not a possibility. You compare the possible to the impossible. So again, we have to get up and say the answer of your question. Do you want to respect the Western civilization that is the peak of human civilization or not? Forget about cultures at the beginning. If you say the Western civilization has to be safeguarded with its hard side and software, and then we say your cultures have to abide by this.
Yeah. Melanie, what impact do you think that we're seeing, particularly from the left, in really pushing for the destruction of our Judeo-Christian heritage, as now we're seeing that Christians are even more politically isolated than they ever were before, fundamental attack on Christians? And can you ever imagine a Bible-believing Christian being the Prime Minister in our country today? With our media and the way that our current culture is, that would look, that would be very difficult in today's political climate. So isn't there a danger that we've already lost?
To some extent, yes. I think you're probably right. Hadn't thought about that, but yes, to some extent. I mean, the only way we'd have a Bible-believing Christian is if Jacob Rees-Mogg got into Downing Street, and I know he probably believes some sections of the Bible. It's looking increasingly unlikely. To some extent, yes. I mean, that's why as Christians, we think about the kingdom being not of this earth, and that's our consolation. And I feel more and more we have to make the most as Christians of where we are now and have a viable alternative lifestyle, because we have to be very strong, because I don't think that the cultural Marxism, which we're now seeing, which people are talking about openly, is going to retreat anytime soon. It was a non-Christian sent me a YouTube reference to cultural Marxism the other day, and of course I was familiar with it because we've reviewed Steve Maltz's new book, Into the Lion's Den, and what cultural Marxism is doing to the nation. And we are seeing its outworking, as you say, in public life. And going back to what you're saying about the left, the people in the civil service who are making the decisions about immigration, etc., they will have been through the education system, say in the 80s, and which has become increasingly less spiritual. Even if you go to a Christian school, it's very unlikely you're going to have an orthodox Christian education. They will still be espousing what they call British values and towing the government line because they have some government funding and they have to comply.
Absolutely. And Tarek, over the last couple of years, we've witnessed, really, the last 2 years in particular, an unprecedented level of terrorist attacks, whether they be in Germany, in Belgium, in France, and also last year here in the UK, we had 3 major Islamist terrorist attacks. But the governments are still not waking up to this danger. Why do you think that's the case?
Before I answer this question, I would like to add a very small remark about what was beautifully said. And I leave it for you to have it discussed later. You have the word anti-Semitic for those who hate the Jews. And you have the word Islamophobia. Tell me, what is the word for those who kill Christians in Pakistan? There is no word. This is outcome of sense of guilt. There is no word. If you are anti-Jews, you are anti-Semitic. If you are anti-Muslim, you are Islamophobic. So, and if you are anti-Christians, and you see 2,000 girls, Christian girls, murdered in Nigeria, what is the word? There is no word. Why there is no word? Because of the guilt. The culture even doesn't defend itself. It doesn't create a word for those who are like anti-Jews, anti-Muslims, anti-Christians. This sense of guilt is extremely important. We come back to your question. It is because, I said this in the British Parliament, you believe that the danger starts from the act, and you need, I know that, I was a professor of law, I know the legal system in Europe. You don't hold people responsible for ideas, but for acts. I know that very well. But in the case of Islamism, you have to ask yourself the following question. The Imam in Bradford, who sent the boys to Damascus to kill the Syrians, is he a partner or not? He didn't have anything to do with the act. His contribution was pre-act. This is the answer to your question.
Yes.
That you actually, some of the boys were monitored by your police. They knew they are dangerous. But because they didn't do something, nothing was done with them. So you were waiting for them to kill. My invitation to you is to think of the preaching. It is part of the crime. Unless you agree that the preaching is part of the crime, you will be monitoring someone for 5 years and only capture him after he kills 50 people in the streets of London.
Very good point. Extremely good point. And it's great to have someone like Tarek on the programme, isn't it, Melanie, who knows about that Arabic background, Islamic culture, can give us some enlightenment in terms of the threats that we face from his own experience. Isn't there a danger that we have come too far in this nation, that, you know, we have a parallel legal system, such as British law, followed then by Sharia law and Sharia courts in this country? Isn't time that we had a leader that was willing to stamp British values at the same time of not being discriminatory, but reinforcing those British values and British law and British way of life in this nation to stand up for the British people?
Yes, it depends what you call British values. I think that's being traduced at the moment. The idea of equality and diversity and democracy. Yes, we agree with democracy, but as Clifford Hill's been saying recently, the actual British values were justice and righteousness.
Absolutely.
And something else which I've forgotten, but they are somewhat higher, because if you insist on equality and diversity, it's bringing people down all the time, which is a leftist mindset. But if you're thinking of justice and righteousness, you're looking up to God, because only He is the source of justice and righteousness. We don't have any of ourselves. And I suppose that's a fundamental difference. Yes, that's come to me as I'm sitting here. So yes, I agree. I mean, I don't know how we would change this. I mean, we do have a legal system, whereas, you know, we're trying to stop the girls being taken abroad for FGM. We do, it's illegal, but as you're saying, with this blind eye being turned. And it's a double mindset. And I would actually say it's a form of racism, because it's saying about Muslims, they can't help it. Well, that's racist. It's if you're treating them as if they're sort of don't have the consciousness or the conscience, it's a form of racism.
Yeah. We're down to the last 4 minutes of the programme. Tariq, what policies would you recommend that the British government adopt in order to deal with not only the issue of mass uncontrolled immigration, but also counter-terrorism measures to ensure that we don't face a threat of Islamic terrorism in this country like we've seen last year?
You have 3 million people in this country that some of them shouldn't have been here. France has like 10 million, so the magnitude of your problem is much smaller than the one in France. You have two things that must be implemented. Before people are granted nationality or residence, certain interviews have to take place. And they have to be prepared by experts who would discover who lies when it comes to the values with related to others, women, everything. I mean, it's very easy. It is very easy to have by experts the type of questions and dialogue that would decide at the end of it whether to allow or not. For the ones in the country, you have to be brave and say that you will be ready to cancel the citizenship or the nationality from those who are certainly detrimental to the social peace. For instance, don't tell me that it is civilized to say, Mr. X, who went to Syria and came back after killing 15 people, because he has a British passport, he has the right to come and live here. No. You have to have, number one, your value system grew in a different circumstances than what you have today. You are facing new threats that didn't exist before. So the solution should not be also the old ones. I mean, again, the girls and the boys who went to Syria, when they come back, you have to have the right to ban them from coming back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And Melanie, in summing up, how do you think as Christians we should react to what Tarek is saying? And how do we pray for our leaders that they would enact righteous policies and righteous decisions and pray for our nation before it's too late?
Well, obviously we have to pray for our leaders like we're commanded to in the Bible by Timothy, and more than we're doing. We've got another National Day of Prayer coming up on the 8th of September, led by David Hathaway. There's been one in the Midlands. It's only prayer which is going to change this, because it's a spiritual issue. The guilt is a spiritual issue. They're not raising your head, or they're not saying what you're afraid to say. It's a spiritual thing. And to prepare is for Christians to become very strong, very committed to the word, praying and strong fellowship. Because I don't think things are going to get better, but the eternal consequence, as Oral Roberts said, if you bow, you burn.
Tarek and Melanie, thank you for being my guests on Politics Today.
We thank you.
And I just want to thank you for watching this programme. Obviously, the issues that we face here in this country and in Europe and across the Western world with mass uncontrolled immigration together with that Islamist threat is something that our governments need to wake up and deal with these issues if we're going to see Western civilization thrive and flourish. And let's understand what made it great, and that's our Judeo-Christian heritage. So thank you for watching Politics Today.